going to read from the book, Is This Autism? This book goes through each of the diagnostic criteria for autism in the current DSM and gives more detailed examples of what this can look like in high-masking adults and/or women, just people with more subtle presentations. And so this is the B2 criteria, which is on flexibility. What people often think a lack of flexibility means. Many clinicians think that all autistic people have rigid routines or rituals, and that they have meltdowns if they cannot follow their routines. Similarly, many clinicians believe that autistics are rigid in all interactions and areas of their life. We frequently hear, he can't be autistic, he doesn't have rigid routines, or she can't be autistic, she is highly flexible with others. Or he can't be autistic, he is capable of very flexible thinking on theoretical or intellectual matters. As you will see, however, there are actually many different types of inflexibility that can accompany autism. Also, for all four of the B criteria, you don't have to meet them at all. You only have to meet 2 of the 4. Many of the behaviors and characteristics discussed in this chapter can be indicative of anxiety and/or OCD in a non-autistic person. And of course, they can also reflect a co-occurring diagnosis of anxiety or OCD in an autistic person. It is essential to consider signs of inflexibility in the larger context of an individual's presentation. What does this category really include? While some autistic individuals are persistently rigid in many aspects of their lives, many can be highly flexible in some interactions and areas of their lives, but highly inflexible in others. Rather than looking for overall inflexibility, we find it helpful to look for islands of rigidity, which can take many different forms, such as routines and rituals. This can manifest as a need to navigate through a daily routine with each task performed in the exact same order or manner, to demand that others follow the same routine for a given activity every time, and so on. We have heard countless examples of these kinds of routines. Another one is strong reactions to small change. Sometimes this is clear and easy to spot. For instance, Donna once worked with an 11-year-old who was still upset and complained every single day about the fact that her parents had painted the bathroom a different color 2 years ago. Other times, the issue is not so obvious, and it requires close attention from a parent or teacher to discern the pattern. For instance, some children have a really bad day every time that there is a substitute teacher or substitute bus driver, or anytime plans change unexpectedly, or if a teacher shifts to a new topic, such as switching from multiplication to division, or a food like macaroni and cheese is made by a different manufacturer. Of note, people who have very limited diets or who wear the same clothes every day may struggle with change because they are inflexible, but it is important to make sure that the difficulty is not better explained by sensory challenges. If the latter are at the root of the inflexibility, then the issue would more appropriately be categorized under the sensory criterion. Another example is difficulty coping with transitions. This is most notable when an autistic person is required to transition away from a preferred activity, such as playing video games, and then to initiate non-preferred activities, such as homework. However, it can also happen with less stressful transitions, such as moving from subject to subject in school. Some autistics talk about autistic inertia, which refers to situations where it is difficult to get started on something or to stop doing something once they get started. It is more difficult to manage autistic inertia when an individual is stressed, overloaded, or tired. Another one is black and white thinking. Autistic people can sometimes think about ideas, activities, or people in ways that feel like an all or none thinking. This type of rigidity can result in an increased interpersonal conflict because there are so many situations that require understanding of the gray area. Another is my way or the highway. Some autistic individuals can be overtly inflexible in their interactions with others. With young children, this may be seen in play, where they may need to be in charge, choose what game to play, what role each child gets, the rules, and so on. Sometimes this causes conflict with other children, but not always. We have seen some autistic kids who are viewed as leaders in their younger years because they have a clear plan for play and will take charge. However, this doesn't always last. By mid-elementary school, these children have often lost their status as leaders because of their difficulty with sharing control and being flexible. Another is getting stuck in their thinking. We hear about this from parents in many different contexts, such as It's impossible to change his interpretation of a situation, or it's so hard for her to change her mind, or she is so rigid in her thought processes and in how she needs to say what she needs to say, or he can't let anything go, or he is very stuck in his viewpoint to the point of insubordination. Or she has a vision in her head and she cannot be talked out of it. Another is an unusually strong moral compass. This has become a bit complicated in the US during the late 2010s and early 2020s because people are thinking more in extremes with regard to political and social justice issues. And so having strong moral convictions has become part of our culture. However, we observe this pattern where an individual has an incredibly strong feelings about social justice issues or about issues of fairness in general long before our current status quo. Another is rigid rule following. This one can be hard to spot because people that engage in rigid rule following are often considered to be model students or employees and may be less likely to present for an evaluation or for treatment. Often these individuals are referred for other reasons, such as anxiety, depression, or perfectionism. Indeed, adults often describe these kids as the easiest kids in the world, as every teacher's dream, or the neighbor's favorite kid to have over, because they can always be counted on to follow the rules and let the adults know if someone else hasn't. However, when we are taking a child's history and we hear statements like, she's always her teacher's favorite, or every year he is a model student, or she has never required any discipline at all, we know that this is a chance that this child is a rigid rule follower. Rigid rule following may be seen in the younger years as a child who refuses to color outside the lines or becomes upset with himself if he accidentally does so. It may be seen in an elementary school child who is not able to bend the rules when playing a board game just for fun, such as, let's change how we play, so if you roll doubles, you lose a turn. As children get older, the rigid rule following can manifest as policing and alienating them from peers who have a more typical and flexible understanding of the subtleties of bending and breaking rules and the reasons why that may be okay. While these individuals rigidly follow rules and expect others to do the same, some of them are not concerned when they themselves break rules, but become extremely upset when others do so. They may also be rigid about some rules, such as not stepping even 1 inch outside of a crosswalk, but quite flexible about others, such as not eating cookies right after dinner. Another is literal interpretations. Many clinicians know that autistics can be concrete or literal, but they are sometimes surprised to learn that this is considered an aspect of rigidity. Being literal is included in this category because it involves difficulty using context to flexibly and thus accurately interpret language. Understanding figurative or non-literal language requires awareness that the words spoken have a different meaning than they usually do, requiring flexible interpretation. Another is refusal to part with certain objects. We are not talking about messy rooms here. We are talking about adamant refusal to part with useless objects such as paper plates, plastic forks, bottle caps, tissue boxes, worn down pencils, old scraps of paper, and countless other examples that we have seen. Parents often present this as being compulsive, being messy, or having collections. It is important to differentiate this from having a particular interest in unusual objects or parts of objects, which can qualify as an unusual interest. It is also different from unusual use of objects, which can qualify as a repetitive or atypical behavior. Inflexibility in girls. Generally speaking, both on and off the autism spectrum, boys tend to externalize, while girls tend to internalize. Thus, in general, boys' inflexibility tends to manifest in behavioral problems, which is probably why so many people believe that if you have autism, you're going to have a lot of behavioral problems. And if you don't have behavioral problems, you can't possibly be autistic. This, of course, is entirely untrue. Autistic girls can certainly be inflexible in any of the ways that we have discussed. However, when they are coping with a situation that requires flexibility, they are less likely to outwardly fight against it and more likely to quietly try to cope. This results in tremendous anxiety, both in anticipating changes and transitions as well as moving through them. Often, autistic girls do not have the support in these stressful situations because, one, they have been so anxious for so long that they are not even aware that they are anxious. It is simply their normal state of being. And two, even if they are aware that they are struggling, it may not occur to them or be comfortable for them to talk about this and to self-advocate, even with their parents. Thus, the symptoms of their inflexibility is a persistently high stress level and associated anxiety. There can also be anxiety related to change, even positively anticipated change like a vacation. That's it. Remember, I have a collection for these if you want to go back to the other criteria, and I will continue on with the rest of the criteria in future videos.